Iris J here with Madrona's Pulse Teachings, and I'm here having a weekend coffee with you and just having a short little astro chat that I like to do sometimes. Astro chats are blending pretty much everything. They're about topics in astrology. They're a little bit heady. I do let my day job of a cultural studies professor come in a little bit more in my astro chats. And today I really wanted to talk about this topic of how astrology is supporting us in these changing times, because all we have to do is look at a quick brief take of the news and we are in changing times. We are in a paradigm shift, whether that's about the earth and climate crisis and the role that humans play in that, or it's about trying to shift ideas of identity and power, politics. You know, it's hard not to bring in the astrology right away in terms of Pluto breaking these things down. But I do think astrology is so important to these changing times, and especially why we come to astrology and how we come to astrology. And if I'm perfectly honest, part of the reason that I'm thinking about this topic right now is because a comment was made to me by an astrologer, a kind of famous astrologer, and was like, you really can't expect people to be part of a paradigm shift. The woman survivor, social justice educator, activist has so much to say about that, but you know, why? And when we come to astrology, I think it's so illuminating about how we use astrology and how some of us come to astrology. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, so I am also very interested in how astrology itself is evolving and needs to evolve in our times. And I do think it's so important to reflect on how we use astrology, why we come to astrology. If we're coming to astrology because we want to find a way to make money on social media and we think astrology is great, and then we just kind of reproduce kind of stereotypical archetypes and memes and horoscopes, that's astrology. I'm not going to say it's not astrology, but it is a very particular use of astrology, and it's actually guided by the medium, which is social media, and it is, in my view, very limited of what astrology is for and how we can use it. And similarly, if we come to astrology for the sake of prediction, which is part of the history of astrology, and for me, really part of the ways that we do see imperialistic patriarchal culture also flood into astrology, because true prediction for me is very different than using astrology as a medium of communication. And we can use astrology and tap into these intuitive gifts that some of us have. Whether we use the word channeling or not, we can still rely on the form and practice and science and art form of astrology and be in a beautiful place of co-creative communication. Versus prediction, traditional prediction is coming from a place of power. It is coming from a place of control, and most efforts that come to control are coming out of a drive of fear. Wanting to control, wanting to know, wanting to create the path, believing in a linear path, believing that money is what makes one success. You know, we could really look at all the ways that those beliefs are recent in the span of human history, and the way that entwining astrology with them is also aligning astrology with a desire to control versus the beauty of the elements, the beauty of sitting with the archetypes, learning to communicate with the archetypes. For me, especially, you know, after I have the most common comment that comes after I think I have a natal reading is that it was just so validating for what we feel. but what, for a variety of reasons, we haven't been allowed to feel. We haven't been allowed to cultivate the intuitive wisdom that comes from being tuned in to divine mystery, to the interconnected web, to all that is, to earth consciousness, to divine feminine and divine masculine. And the archetypes become a way of speaking with that knowledge and deepening that knowledge. And there's infinite layers. And for me, I love astrology because we can never fully understand it. There's so many places to go and layers to dip into, and then to different perspectives to take. And for me, that's the beautiful journey of it. But why is this so important to our paradigm shift? What is our paradigm shift about? You know, we have a society that's been constructed, especially in Western culture, but not only in Western culture, that keeps very limited people in power, and then has a subgroup of very privileged financial folks who are not of the 1%, but also have quite a bit of power. And it's not working. It's not working. We know it's not working. In terms of what is happening to the earth, it's not working. In terms of the future of the human species, it's not working. So it would seem that a paradigm shift is needed. And when we come into astrology, especially when we look at the chart from an evolutionary perspective, we are looking at what our soul is here to develop and grow with and align with and heal with and transform with. And I don't know how we cannot look at that alignment coming in as also being aligned with the paradigm shift. And again, I find that at least most of the folks that I cross paths with, they've known about that alignment since early childhood, and yet we are socialized to silence it, to quiet it, to believe in the 9-to-5 rat race of just climbing a social ladder. Now we see all of that rhetoric of capitalism coming into the spiritual social media realms, and it's confusing and it's exhausting. And yet we can just put our feet in the earth and we can feel that alignment and we can feel that attunement. And all of the archetypes speak to that alignment. They speak to that attunement. It's why actually in my practice, I don't even focus that much on shadow work. Of course, we need to be aware of it. I find we have a culture that is obsessed with shadow work now. Maybe this is part of because I come from my own experience and working with folks in really extreme spectrums of violence and trauma. But my experience, most of us that have grown up in the shit, we know about the shadow. Yeah, of course, there's ways that we cope and we have to unlearn certain coping mechanisms. But in my experience, we actually haven't been allowed to embrace our joy. We haven't been allowed to, we have, especially folks that come with a lot of trauma, we haven't been allowed to just breathe into the fact that it's okay to live a life of joy, to live a life of alignment, and that we also, I think, do have an intuitive deconstructing of joy and happiness from what the media feeds us, where that media is absolutely wrapped up in social paradigms of capitalism and colonialism and patriarchy. And that is internalized by women all the time in social media. And it's confusing and it's messy, and yet such insight comes when we really listen to the archetypes. And the archetypes, when we embody them in the way that we feel, and I think we also, astrology helps us to see that we've already been embodying them. And we actually just have to unlearn and unlearn lessons that we've been taught about how we're supposed to show up in life, how we're supposed to show up in family. And astrology just supports us in doing that. And when we do that in our own life, even if we only ever talk to 5 people, it makes such a difference. And if we talk to a lot more than 5 people and we actually have those platforms of power, as we like to say, it makes a difference there too. And also there's this inner mechanism that just feels so good and juicy when we come into these alignments. And so I think it's just important for us to reflect on how astrology absolutely supports the paradigm change, of how joy, living and breathing joy, supports a paradigm change. And we feel it in the body when we release from being attached to silencing ourselves, which is usually at the intersection of our own personal trauma and interlocking trauma and social traumas and social injustice, and also social narratives of how we should be living and who we're supposed to take as a role model. I find it interesting that we have this culture that will take women who have an incredible amount of financial and social capital, who have structured their entire physical appearance and life to making money, whether that's in the music industry, or in politics or in acting, and have actually molded their being into an idea of what it means to be a woman that was been along a lot longer than, I'm not even going to name names in the pop industry. We looked at them to tell us what it is to be a woman, rather than all of the women that we encounter on day to day, the single moms, our grandmothers, who are just doing it, who are just living the paradigm shift, every breath, every exhausted breath. I think my most cherished gift of being someone that has clients, and especially mostly female clients, is I am just always in awe of the power that an everyday woman has, and the choices that we make, and the struggles that we have, and the joy that we find. And whether it comes from the way we raise kids to the way we write letters against our city councilor, or, the way that we stand up, and the way that we've overcome certain things. And that just doesn't get valued enough because there's not fame attached to it in our culture. And in astrology, I think the language is just there, that this is what it's about. It's about, our everyday life, and the way that we do embody the divine feminine, and that we find her speaking to us in dreams and out in wilderness and in so many other ways. And for me, that is the paradigm shift. It really is. So there's some heady astro chatting. I hope there's little kernels for you to think about and journal about and write about and talk about. And it doesn't even matter if we agree, if we're just having conversations and things are happening. And I am sending such blessings to everyone, and be well.